This is the California Liberty Project podcast.
Welcome back to the California Liberty Project podcast once again. My name is Greg, and I really appreciate everyone being here today. Again, I'm blessed to have a great guest with a lot of really interesting things to say about California, specifically Northern California on some of these issues, because we've been talking with a lot of SoCal guests recently and some Central Valley guests as well. But now we wanted to maybe talk about some Northern California issues and also some statewide issues as well. So Adina Flores is my guest. I'll introduce her in just 1 second. Really excited to talk with her. But first, quickly, remember to follow California Liberty Project on Instagram, follow us on Twitter, check out our Linktree, Linktree/California Liberty Project. Follow us on all socials and whatnot. And then also check us out on Rumble and YouTube, trying to upload videos there and grow those channels as well, whenever and wherever I can. So once again, thank you for joining the podcast today, whether you're listening on Apple, Google, Spotify. And our guest is Adina Flores. And Adina is a biracial civil rights activist, investigative journalist, and former government employee based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. And she is a contributor to the California Globe. So many of you people have hopefully been reading the California Globe and her articles there specifically, and maybe you've seen her on Instagram or social media. But we're really pleased to speak with Adina Flores. Adina, welcome to the podcast. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Greg. I appreciate you and California Liberty Project for having me today. And as referenced, my name is Adina Flores. I am a freelance journalist. I do a lot of investigative reporting for the California Globe. And I'm also the former executive assistant to the board and superintendent of Santa Rosa Schools. As of January 2023, I am no longer a government employee. I'm essentially one of the largest whistleblowers within the state, and I'm currently in mediation discussions for the settlement that is owed to me for being illegally forced out, and more to come with that. So I'm excited to bring transparency to government. And as of this weekend, our local media source, the Press Democrat, which is owned by Mr. Darius Anderson, one of Governor Newsom's lobbyists, I was actually labeled as doggish, which essentially means I am resilient and determined beyond measure, and one of the essentially largest activists within Sonoma County, Northern California. So although they attempted to drag my name through the mud, I take that label with pride, and I'm glad to be recognized finally for the work I've been doing for the community. So that's a little bit about me.
Very cool. And so you're based out of Sonoma County, you said?
Previously, so I'm actually now in Vallejo, California, in Solano County, and that's my fiance's hometown, Vallejo. So we have a lot of connections out there. I'm currently getting involved with the local GOP chapters and just building our bridges.
Very cool. And so it seems like you're a frequent contributor to California Globe. How did you get involved in writing for and contributing to the Globe? And maybe also take this opportunity really quick before we dive in. Tell all of our listeners about the Globe. Why should they be reading the Globe and following the Globe on social media?
Sure. So to speak to that, they actually found me through social media. I have a large following on Instagram. We're at civil_rights707. And I have essentially been conducting an audit of our state's financials for the past year and seeing a lot of nepotism and conflicts of interest. So I've been opening up cases with the Fair Political Practices Commission and essentially proving that conspiracies are not what have been labeled as conspiracies, they are tangible. And a lot of individuals who were very well recognized conservatives were impressed with the research that I've done. And so one gentleman from Sonoma County, his name is Dan. He was previously largely involved with the local GOP chapter, and his friend Rick from Sacramento, who has a background in economics, they were regular readers of the California Globe, had a close connection to Miss Katie Grimes, the deputy editor. And so they reached out to her and recommended for her to connect with me. And that was how I got linked to the Globe. And I am blessed beyond measure with this connection because they have true integrity in journalism. I was previously writing for other publications and am no longer allowed to do so because I told the truth that didn't fit a political narrative. And so I would definitely recommend to check out my articles and as well as Miss Grimes' articles and the other contributors, because it is the real information that you can't find anywhere else.
Very good. Yeah, and that's a big part of what I wanted to talk to you about today is some really interesting pieces that you've written that I think people should be reading. Go out and support this work at the California Globe by all means. So specifically, and I love this headline. I don't know if this was you or your editor over there, but your most recent article, I believe, is called Smart Cities or Gateway to Hell, which is great. I mean, that's a great hook. That is something you guys should click on over at California Globe. And so this is getting into this, call it a scourge, this plague of smart cities, and basically having WEF and Klaus Schwab type thinking planning out our cities for us locally. And at least having guidelines, which are, rolling down, they're trickling down, if you will, polluting state policy, local policy, and, other policy in general, housing policy, and the way we're designing cities. But Adina, can you walk us through what's kind of the thesis of that article specifically? I know you were talking about, I think, a specific property management company and some issues there. I believe it was it Vallejo? What's kind of the main takeaway of this article for all of our listeners?
Sure. So to speak to the headline itself, Smart Cities Gateway to Hell, that was my creativity. And it is very important to me because I am a follower of Christ, and that means to actually read scripture for ourselves. I encourage everybody to read as much as you can. And we are seeing currently an inversion of God's words, and that essentially is your entrance to hell. These narratives that are being pushed without our consent, really, that the public is just not informed of. And so with the smart cities, we are seeing recently, at least here in the Bay Area, Northern California, a large expansion of low-income housing. And this is happening everywhere, largely due to inflation. Nobody can afford to purchase a new home any longer. And with the smart cities, for example, at the Meritage Apartments in Vallejo, California, which are now under the umbrella of Bridge Property Management, they have partnered with a local 501c3 that was also established in part by Bridge. And that nonprofit is located on site. They are essentially providing services to the residents. But if you look further into their history and the initiatives they've proposed, we see things such as social and emotional learning, which is definitely a leftist ideology. And when parents are not aware what their children are doing, and they have access essentially to the youth on site and are offering these activities, in my mind, that is considered indoctrination. And so how that ties into smart cities, if we look at a higher level with the World Economic Forum, Mr. Klaus Schwab has been largely proposing the fourth industrial revolution for many years, and essentially a global government. And so what I'm working on is showing at the local level how initiatives are tied internationally. And so my article dives deeper into those connections.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some specifics? I mean, how are these types of like globalist organizations putting their tendrils or their claws into some of our local communities, such as in Vallejo or other places you might have looked into?
Yes, so I've been completely censored by the local media. Mr. Anderson, Darius Anderson, he owns the Press Democrat in Northern California, and that's under the umbrella of Sonoma Media Investments. Mr. Anderson owns Platinum Advisors as well, which is one of the largest lobbying firms in the nation. He's actually a very close colleague of Governor Newsom, lobbyist for Newsom, Miss Nancy Pelosi, and many others. And so they go way back. And if you take a look at Platinum Advisors' client portfolio, it includes some entities such as Pfizer, Sutter Health, some familiar names there, which further explains the COVID-19 narrative for the pro-vaccination stance. And to speak further to that, our county chairman former county chairman for the Board of Supervisors in Sonoma County, James Gore, actually filed a restraining order on my fiance last year because he wants me to be quiet at this point. His wife is the former resident entrepreneur, which fancy title for somebody who really doesn't do much for our community. And she was also the former vice president of global partnerships to the United Nations. And so I've essentially been showing how we have individuals that have been sent either from an international level or from the White House directly to these positions of power in local government. And so it's very curious if you start looking into these connections, what you'll actually find.
Yeah, I'm sure it's scary to say the least. Are some of these individuals actually getting involved, like at the city level, city council, or even like supervisors for a county? Are they getting involved with like specific planning decisions and even like tenant law and that sort of thing with landlords and whatnot?
Absolutely. So to speak to that, within the city of Healdsburg, the mayor of Healdsburg, Miss Ariel Kelly, who is an extremely racist woman, and she's actually personally attacked me on social media, posted comments about my race, faith, and gender on my Facebook page, and extremely inappropriate. So to speak to her family, essentially her grandfather, I believe his name is Samuel Gottesman. She belongs to one of the most wealthy Jewish families in the area. Her family actually had possession of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which they donated to the museum in Israel. And so Miss Kelly has a 501c3 as mayor that she founded called Corazon Healdsburg. And Corazon was selected as the entity to facilitate the new UBI programs that are being launched in Northern California. So the UBI essentially is where they give specific families, low-income families, $500 a month automatically, and they are choosing which families receive that funding. And so Ms. Kelly, as mayor of Healdsburg, gave her nonprofit the agreement, and she actually was leaning towards initiating that motion. Ms. Kelly did not disclose that she's also a consultant to Corazon, and she's also a founder of Corazon and previously or currently sits on the board. And so under the jurisdiction of the Fair Political Practices Commission, that is a tremendous conflict of interest. So I have been showing these ties, following the conflict of interest code, pulling their statements of economic interest to show their personal investments, earned income, rental properties to find where there is potential malfeasance, and then opening cases with the FPPC. And at least I have about over a dozen cases open currently, and these individuals have been getting investigated not only by the state, but our local DA's office and other sectors of government as well.
Yeah, so I want to go back to the UBI thing that caught my eye or my ears, so to speak. Are there a number of like Northern California like municipalities or counties that are implementing UBIs? I mean, was it $500 a month? I mean, that doesn't sound like very much, but I know it's kind of like getting the camel's nose inside the tent, right? Is this common, or is it just Healdsburg or like other cities up in NorCal, or what's
I
up with
don't
that?
Sure, that's a good question because I hadn't heard of this until recently, and so I was surprised to see that within my county. The pilot program was launched last year, I believe, in Stockton, and that's the only one. And then all
Yes.
of a sudden, Sonoma County jumped in on it as well. So based on this global governance agenda to essentially make individuals' reliance upon government entirely, this seems like it's the beginnings of that, and we are in the testing stage. And of course, in Sonoma County, we are right next to Bohemian Grove, and so a lot of these initiatives are planned from Sonoma County that are governing the rest of the nation. So but I believe Sonoma County will be a testing ground to see what is to expand across the rest of the state.
So maybe they're hatching some of these plots in Bohemian Grove in front of that giant stupid owl idol. Is that what you're getting at?
There's a lot of interesting things going on in that area. We actually have, we've been talking a lot about, and this is a topic which interests many people in the community, the drag story hours that people have been protesting across the state, and I've been largely involved in those protests myself. But prior to that, there was actually a summer camp that was initiated with a local nonprofit called Land Paths, and it was a camp for kids ages 9 to 14, essentially for the LGBTQ, I don't know all the letters, but the alphabet crew and their allies, but targeting youth. And so people, of course, are welcome to send their children to whatever they like in their free time. I absolutely encourage that. However, my concern was that these children are being brought up to the Bohemia Preserve, which borders the Bohemian Grove. It's actually a part of that general property. And so, being that I was formerly working for the school district, I actually physically went up to this location. There's no cell service. The mascot for or at least last year, the mascot for the kids' camp was called Hoot, an owl. And so I found that peculiar, being that it's in close proximity to Bohemian Grove. And
Right.
I'm very
Right.
involved in auditing the child trafficking cases taking place in Sonoma County, and there is a ton of that currently. So I'm not stating that that's taking place at this camp. I just find it an odd location to take these children. I find it odd that there's no cell phone service, and there is a lot of symbology encompassing these initiatives.
Yeah, that is really kind of strange, isn't it? So for people who might not be as familiar, where exactly is Bohemian Grove? That's somewhere in Marin County, or is it over in Sonoma County?
So Bohemian Grove is located in Sonoma County, in Monte Rio specifically, over by the Russian River area. And for those to take an even higher level dive, it's essentially campgrounds where the wealthiest men meet annually in privacy, and supposedly it's just a recreational event. However, if we talk about our history, that's where the Manhattan Project discussions took place. And so that is a huge part of history that essentially should not have been conducted behind closed doors. And so, being that I see so many Brown Act violations on a daily basis, I have concerns that these individuals meet once a year and have the ability to not be privy to the public eye and discuss matters that essentially could affect our entire nation.
So on the Brown Act, what exactly does the Brown Act say? Is that one of these transparency laws essentially for public office holders and public meetings? Or can you tell us a little bit more about that and maybe some of what you've uncovered related to the Brown Act here in California?
Sure. So to speak to the Brown Act is extremely important. I'm actually working, if I hopefully can get this settlement money in a few weeks, we are working on launching a 501c4 so we can actually lobby, but I want to teach individuals how to get involved in government, how to understand all of their rights and the avenues available to them. And so I think it's super important to create change, to actually get involved. So the Brown Act is for local meetings. And for example, to speak to the school district, they recently violated my First Amendment rights as outlined by the Brown Act. They have to accept criticism of public policies and my right to free speech. And what happened was there was a long-winded story with my school trustees. My fiance and the trustees have words for each other, to say the least. And my school board member at Sheffield, who's our former board president, decided to make a 7-minute speech about my fiance and myself, and then essentially say he wouldn't be listening to anything we had to say and shut off his camera every time we spoke from there. Being that 2 children were just stabbed at Montgomery High School in class, one of them died because our school board decided to remove school resource officers from campus. I started to reference those issues during the safety committee agenda item, and my mic was muted, and the board president basically told me that my comment was not relevant to the safety committee. We're establishing the
Wow.
safety committee because kids are getting attacked and faculty are getting attacked on campus. And so from there, I sent to the district what is called a cure and correct letter. From the date of incident, essentially you have 30 days to outline under the Brown Act what stipulations were violated and essentially what changes you would like to see. In this incident, because I had previously sent them a letter of intent to sue, it does show tangible malfeasance that this was intentional, and that is actually a prosecutable act. So I have not yet received a response. They have until this Friday to go ahead and respond. And you can also send these letters to the attention of the district attorney as well. And if you do not get a response within that 30-day window, then the DA's office can actually send a cease and desist, and you can take legal action at that point. So that is a brief overview of the Brown Act, but it's really important if you have a student to get involved in the school board meetings, understand what that entails, and for other local agencies, city council or board of supervisors as well.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's really important to kind of know some of the basics on this and get acquainted with more of this regarding Brown Act and how public proceedings are supposed to operate, right, locally at city council or the school board. I think it is really important because that way a lot of parental activists or people who are going out and trying to be vigilant, trying to be active citizens, so they go out there to these meetings, board meetings and whatnot, city council meetings, and then they know, that they have recourse if they feel like they're not being listened to, or if their mic is shut off, or if the wool is kind of being pulled over their eyes, right? There is recourse, and these are tactics that are legal and peaceful, and these are implemented to protect the citizenry, right?
Absolutely. And it is essential because you can beg and plead with these individuals all you want, but they have agendas. They get put on these commissions or councils or boards because they know what they're doing. They somehow, 99% of the time, are benefiting financially from the contracts that are proposed. And they definitely have political narratives that they're pushing. So it doesn't really matter, unfortunately, at the end of the day, how much emotion comes with your statement. Until you affect their money, they are not going to change anything at all.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Money is obviously the mother's milk of politics, and even at the local level. I mean, these people need campaign donations. They're scared of fines. They're scared of financial recourse. So I think that's a very good point to make. So going back to the UBI, Universal Basic Income, which is really interesting to me. I know that I think it was Stockton that initially kind of put it in. I think that made national news. And I'm not sure if that was kind of like a PR ploy on the part of the mayor or city council. I don't know the details behind that Stockton announcement. And then it sounds like maybe in other Northern California cities. What is your opinion? why are they beginning to put in the UBI in certain, little bits and pieces in cities around the state? I know I have my conspiratorial mindset or I have my angle on that, but why do you think we're beginning to see the appearance of UBI rearing its ugly head in our state locally?
Well, locally, I know that especially in Sacramento, where I was doing an interview with 360 Radio recently, the homelessness is out of control. People cannot afford to feed their families with the inflation and these ridiculous policies that are getting put into place. And so when we're talking to reflect back on Klaus Schwab's idea of the fourth industrial revolution, being reliant on technology, being reliant on the government, that means essentially they want us to own nothing and be happy. And when you no longer have the right to own property, as quoted by Karl Marx, that is the inception of communism. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the United States right now.
Yeah, it's definitely beginning to pop up all over the place, and I think it's a really awful idea to say the least. But I will posit as well that some of these local experiments with the UBI, as dumb as they are, and I think as prone as they're going to be to failure, I think they are going to be largely coinciding with the switch over to digital currency, whether it's Fed now or some kind of federal banning of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, but going fully digital in the economy. Again, 5 or 10 years away, whatever that might be. But when we do go digital, it's going to be that much easier to keep people tethered to the government, right? And to keep people totally dependent on getting those zeros and ones, just getting the digits deposited in their account every month. And of course, then you can control the populace more and more. The government can, that is. And also, you don't really have to worry so much about it's like a different way of looking at inflation. Of course, they're still inflating the money supply, but they can directly control people's bank accounts. They can debit, they can take money out, they can put money in, and so forth. And it's just, I think, personally, one more step toward total control over your life, right? Like you said, you'll own nothing, and I don't know, maybe you'll be happy. I don't even think they're going to drop the "you'll be happy" part, I think, really quickly, right?
Absolutely. Yes. And the digital currency is terrifying. Obviously, we've seen a lot of movement with our economy, and we all heard about the Silicon Valley bank crash, the second largest crash in history. And that's something that I had brought to the attention of all local media last year. And ironically enough, they wanted to publish it when it hit mainstream. The reason being is to reflect again on our county supervisor for Sonoma, James Gore. His wife, Elizabeth Gore, actually founded a nonprofit with Governor Newsom's wife, Jennifer Newsom, called California Partners Project. And she is essentially somebody that ranks pretty high within our government as far as somebody who's an influencer. And Miss Elizabeth Gore also founded a for-profit business called Hello Alice, where she is supposedly giving grants to minority individuals, but nobody who I know that's applied has received any funding. And I found it interesting that one of her former board members and lead investors was Mr. John Chena, the former president of Silicon Valley Bank. And
not John Cena, but John Chena.
John Chena.
Okay.
Yes. And so I just find it interesting as I follow these money trails that somehow every single time it ties back to the same people, whether it's the banking sector or housing or cannabis, which I'm very focused on auditing. Every single sector, it's the same people pushing a button.
So tell me a little bit about the cannabis industry in California. What have you looked into? What have you uncovered? What are some of the facts that you're finding on the ground?
Well, I don't even know where to get started with that. I have so many investigations open and valid points that I brought forward that I actually have Governor Newsom's people DMing me on Instagram And
Wow.
yeah, that's been interesting. So let's talk about the fact that Mr. Gore and individuals such as Darius Anderson and their ties to the cannabis industry are currently under investigation with the Cannabis Control Bureau for the state of California, as they are the Fair Political Practices Commission. And I'm seeing things. I've had some great leads from our community members. For instance, within Petaluma, Sonoma County, I was sent photos from an extensive investigation that took place for about a year or so. And there was a Petaluma creamery truck that was photographed, and it was essentially siphoning water from our local hydrants while we were told by Newsom that we were in a drought, and then taking the water off site to cannabis grows. So one of those particular grows was Sonoma Hill Farms. And when I looked into them further, Sonoma Hill Farms also owns an investment group called Big Rock. And when looking into the portfolio for Big Rock, of course, one of their clients is Plump Jack, Newsom's hospitality group. So again, I find it interesting that we're supposedly in a drought, but Newsom can use illegally siphon our water from hydrants to take to he and his buddies' cannabis grows. Seems like a problem.
There's always a problem. I mean, this guy finds a way to, it appears, reward those that he is connected with, and they're never suffering. It's always kind of the little people, right? The people living in the inland parts of the state or the valleys. So many of us, away from the coastal strip, are the ones who bear the brunt of his policies. So with our governor, Newsom, it seems like there's always some kind of favoritism or nepotism or some kind of special deal that he and his cronies or his buddies, his family get. Has that been your experience? Is that just the exact same thing that seems to be happening now? You mentioned with some of these pot grows or dispensaries and whatnot. What's some more on the Newsom connection that we're always dealing with in this state?
Yes, absolutely. So I am somebody who absolutely supports natural wellness and huge advocate for the cannabis industry. So I've been saddened to see so many of our local farmers get pushed out because they're being denied permits or extorted by code enforcement for violations, which are really not legitimate to begin with. And so when we reflect back a couple years ago, at least within the county of Sonoma, there were around 60 permits granted, and about half of those approximately were tied to a group called Cannacraft. And Cannacraft is lobbied for by Mr. Darius Anderson, Newsom's lobbyist. His brother Kirk was previously one of the head executives to Cannacraft. And so that's interesting enough because I've had so many people come forward to me and say that they've had a miserable time dealing with these approvals, yet the Cannacraft affiliates are passing through with flying colors. And so, what is that relation to Governor Newsom?
Yeah, there's always some kind of backdoor, it seems like, to this guy. And it's funny because in California, there's such it's such a mess, if I could just put it bluntly, with not only this cannabis issue, but with so many issues. But it's like the state kind of legalizes cannabis, but then like on a county by county or locality by locality kind of basis, it's overregulated, hyperregulated. As you're saying, some grows, seem to get special favors or seem to get permits. Maybe others get caught in red tape. Is that kind of the rule? Do you think, is that intentional in this state, or is it just bureaucratic incompetence out of Sacramento?
It's absolutely intentional when we're talking about the local level, which I'm very focused on. Sonoma County Supervisor Gore appointed his own brother-in-law, Jake McKee, to the Fish and Wildlife Commission that essentially gives advisory or establishes guidance surrounding cannabis enforcement. His brother-in-law owns a consulting firm by the name of Wayfinder LLC, and they specialize in cannabis law and land use. And so Mr. McKee did not disclose this on his statement of economic interest. He's currently under investigation with the FPPC. I also found out over the past few days that Mr. Gore himself sat on the cannabis ad hoc committee, which ad hoc is not subject to the Brown Act, meaning that we have no access to those agendas or minutes. It's really not clear as to what decision.
Can you hear me? I'm still here.
Yeah, I can hear
Okay,
you.
cool. You just dropped out for a second. I'll cut this part out. Well, that's all very interesting. It sounds like you got a lot of different investigations going. Are there some other ones that you're working on that you can kind of tip us off to, or any upcoming articles that you want us to be watching for? Or what else are you involved in investigatively?
I'm involved in pretty much everything at this point. So I'm sure
Fair
I
enough.
would love a break sometime soon, but my articles will give you more insight into all the avenues. I'm always looking for leads. So if you have a story, please find me on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. And I want to help bring people justice. Just to speak to that a bit further, as I said, I have my settlement negotiations coming up here shortly. But essentially, if I am to win my case, Governor Newsom did put into effect a bill last year that indicates there is no non-disclosure agreement that can be included as part of a settlement agreement, meaning I can be as transparent as possible. And so if I can show that Title 21 was violated for forcing people to be inoculated for COVID-19, mask or test, which all remains under emergency use authorization, that would be applicable to
Right.
all public sector employees that did not wish to abide by those mandates.
Yeah, and that's a huge one, especially if it percolates down to city employees. I know I've had so many acquaintances, friends, people I know online and whatnot who have been affected by this. You know, people who are police officers, firefighters, who have been threatened or actually lost their jobs, literally lost their jobs over refusing to take the jab or being forced to take this experimental gene therapy. So this would be huge if it percolated down through all levels of public employees. Is that your understanding? Would that be the case? Do you think it would trickle down to city and even county employees?
I would sure hope so,
I
because
hope.
there have been recent cases that came to fruition, such as Bishop Unified School District just had a class action. A group of a dozen parents or so actually sued the district for violating Title 21. And so basically, it just comes back to the fact that everybody can replicate what I'm doing. I did not have to pay for an attorney whatsoever. It's just knowing your rights. And the government does not want us to know those. They want us to be reliant upon an attorney who essentially at times they don't have our best interests either. They're just, getting funded because they know that we're desperate.
Yeah. And can you remind all the listeners about Title 21? What is that exactly? How does that pertain in your case?
So, Title 21 is a federal regulation which stipulates that a consumer must be received informed consent that they can accept or refuse an emergency use product. And every single product that has come forth during COVID-19 has remained under emergency use authorization for the entire duration. Comirnaty, the only fully FDA approved COVID-19 vaccine, as of August 23rd, 2021, is not being manufactured, and that can actually be
Correct.
confirmed in the Federal Register.
That's right. Yeah. It's like a kind of like a twin product, right? Nobody who has received COVID jabs has received Comirnaty, whereas Comirnaty was the actual, quote, licensed product or whatever, right? So it's a very interesting kind of sleight of hand or shell game that they're playing for immunity, avoiding liability, right? Nobody's received Comirnaty, as we pointed out. I find that fascinating.
Exactly. And as cited in my articles, I have an article about the Sonoma County Equity Office. You can actually view text messages and emails between your local elected officials through the California Public Records Act. I have correspondence between our equity officer, who's my school board trustee as well, Miss Alegria de la Cruz, and Sonoma County Supervisor Gore. Interesting messages discussing leveraging the wine grower investments and how that pertains to inoculating farm workers at a 95% inoculation rate. So my deduction from that is they are leveraging vaccination rates in exchange for investments.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of big money sloshing around in the past few years. I mean, everything from ESSER funds going to, I think, local school districts and other entities. Of course, there was all the Small Business Act, all the favoritism that was occurring. I mean, the past 3 years have been such an amazing study in corruption, government largesse, waste, and malfeasance, misfeasance. It's been horrifying. I'm really glad that there are people out there, such as yourself, who are actually fighting back, fighting your own case. But if you win your case, it sounds like a lot of people could be helped with this precedent.
Absolutely, because I'm not somebody who's going to be silent about it. And I already am actively helping the county employees who were illegally forced out for adhering and advocating for their constitutional rights. So I hope and I will make myself available to help anybody replicate my efforts who's been also forced out as well.
Very good. Any other investigative work done on like Scott Wiener or specific legislators and their dealings or anything of that nature? Richard Pan was in the legislature up until last election. I was always wondering, as a pediatrician, what were some of his connections? I don't know. I would just ask the question. He was so gung-ho about pushing the jab. I was always kind of curious, like, well, what's going on there? I guess you're just really a big vaccine advocate. That must be all it is. But
Uh,
go ahead.
That guy, I actually met him in person. I was at the California School Board Association conference in San Diego a few years ago during COVID, and he led the luncheon for Asian Pacific Islanders. But instead of talking about that community and the initiatives they're working on, he spent 45 minutes talking about why people essentially need to be mandated to get vaccinated. So it was an interesting luncheon topic, and I politely excused myself on several occasions.
I'm sure you had to probably fight to maintain composure and decorum. Yeah, I mean, the past few years again have been a study in insanity, where it's like people talking about the jab, all the jab advocates. And it's funny because if I do try to upload this to YouTube, it's probably going to get pulled down now, but the heck with it, But it's funny because all the jab advocates are saying, hey, you've got to go out and get the jab. You can't be selfish. And of course, fundamentally, they never really explained why, if the jab is so miraculous, then they get the jab, then why are they not protected? Why does everyone else have to take it? It's a fundamental logical question, which boggles the mind. It's like that meme, of the person imagining it's a woman with equations and like diagrams floating around her head. It never really made sense, right? The whole thing was so insane, and it was pushed so hard by people who either wanted control or wanted to make money or dole out the money, which really is a form of control. I think a lot of us were standing back saying, wait a minute, you never fundamentally explained why I must get this product injected into my body, but what you got injected into your body is not sufficient. Why is it going to work for me to protect you? And maybe I'm looking at it too logically. I don't know. Do you ever figure this out with the mandates?
Well, so if you refer to, and again, going back to reading through the biological license application, it actually states the original Pfizer formula is investigational. And per the CDC's glossary of terms, investigational means you can start testing the product through clinical trials, but absolutely cannot use it on the general public. So every single inoculation offered to date remains in the investigational stages. And what I'm seeing is, people are just baffled at this point, and you'll have to read my article talking about the history of eugenics in the state, but essentially the psychological warfare that is being perpetuated by our government currently is similar to what was utilized during the times of the Holocaust to just gaslight individuals. What I'm seeing as a trend is that individuals who have previously been through child abuse or domestic violence, such as myself, I've been through both, are very aware of these cycles and the fact that a lie does not wish to be questioned. And that's where we stand.
It is indeed where we stand. And what makes me almost sick to my stomach is that I know some young people, even in my family, who are going into college. I've heard of friends and acquaintances with family members going into college. So 18, 19-year-olds. And there are still California state schools. So like CSU schools, which there are 23 or 24. I forget the number. A few dozen of these schools. And I think the UC schools as well. I'm not sure on that. But these colleges that are taxpayer funded, they're supposedly public colleges, universities here in California, they are still, to my knowledge, many of the campuses, if not all of them, are still requiring the jab for these healthy 18 and 19-year-olds. I mean, it boggles the mind, but maybe it doesn't when you try to explain it or look into it.
I mean, it's not too boggling when you follow the money, because speaking back to Mr. Anderson, Newsom's lobbyist, he's actually on the California Community College Board. So these folks, they're just placed everywhere to push their narratives that make them money and fund themselves completely from our tax dollars. So it's disgusting, to say the least.
That it is. Yeah, you're not going to find any disagreement with me there on that. So Adina, I really appreciate your time here today and coming on to the podcast. For everyone listening, as you can tell, Adina has, she's got a lot of irons in the fire, lots of stuff coming up. It sounds like some really good articles. Even go back through her catalog, and there's some really articles there on the California Globe. So make sure to go and follow the California Globe on Instagram. Follow Adina on Instagram and Twitter. And Adina, shout out those handles again for Instagram and Twitter for you.
Yes, so that's going to be civil_rights 707.
Very cool. Okay, perfect. And that's on both Twitter and Instagram?
Correct. And you're free if you want to follow me on Facebook. I'm, Adina Flores on there as well. So please, if you need my help, you know where to find me.
Excellent. Well, Adina, great to meet you and talk with you here today on the podcast. I really appreciate your time in coming on California Liberty Project. And thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Greg. God bless you. And I appreciate you helping my voice to be shared. And hopefully this can help somebody else.
God bless. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
This has been the California Liberty Project podcast. Make sure to subscribe, share it with others, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter.